Welcome to the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John Tulac.
Welcome to another episode of Professionals of the Inland Empire, affectionately known as PI. I'm John Tulac. I'm an international business attorney located in Claremont, California, and I'm the host of this podcast. I'm the one that came up with it, so that's why I get to be the host. And I'm doing this because I am privileged to interact with a lot of outstanding professionals in the Inland Empire. People that can really help you grow your business, develop your business, improve your business, change your business, whatever your business might happen to need. We have the people to do that. And they are all experts in their field, and they've all been carefully vetted and specifically invited to be members of the premier networking group in the United States called Provisors. So you can't just knock on the door and get in. It does take a process. And as I say, I'm privileged to work with people who are smart, interesting, and highly competent in everything that they do. So my gift to the Inland Empire, if you will, is twofold. One, in terms of introducing to you terrific people that you can work with, and two, by expanding your ability to do commerce well, we improve the economic conditions of the Inland Empire. And one of the things that we want to accomplish with this broadcast of podcasts, I guess it's a podcast, not a broadcast, is to inform our government people at the county and city level that they don't have to go outside of the county. They don't have to go outside of the state of California to get really, really good talent to help them with the things that they need in conducting government business. So this is why we do it. And today I am really happy to welcome two outstanding people in their fields. And that is Amanda Scott, who is a professional executive recruiter, and Joe Van Tassel, who is also a recruiter, a professional recruiter, but of engineers and technology folk. So they are in related spaces, but they have very different segments, and they also work very, very well together. So we're going to demonstrate that collaboration as well. So welcome, Amanda and Joe, to Professionals of the Inland Empire. I'm glad to have you with us today.
Good to be with you, John.
Yeah, great to be here.
So Amanda, we'll start with you. I always like to start with a little bit of you describing what you do and how you do it, and that background story, that what got you here. There's always part of that story that's really special to each person that makes them where they are today. So kick us off.
Sure. Yeah, so I got into recruiting in 2002 in Southern California and just immediately took to it. I loved that I could help businesses hire the right people to enact change or growth or whatever they were trying to achieve. And I loved that I could help individual people get into new job opportunities that advance their careers and improve their livelihood. I found it to be super impactful and important and fun and exciting. But it didn't take me too long working for other people in the recruiting industry to see that I feel the recruiting industry is so focused on volume that recruiters often forget, we are working for other people. This is not about us closing deals. It's about helping businesses and candidates make good, mindful career matches. And so I realized pretty early on, if I was going to remain happy in this business, I was going to have to start my own firm at some point. And so in 2010, I got that opportunity and went ahead, and next month it'll be 15 years in business. It's just incredible to think back on all that's changed and grown and lasted through 15 years. So I really enjoy working with business owners in particular. I typically work with CEO, owner operators that are trying to do something major at their company. They're trying to build their executive team. They're trying to retire. They're trying to grow, expand, change in some way. And so they have to add people on their executive team. And, I do a really thorough search and a far-reaching search for any search that I work on, and really work hard to vet the candidates that I represent, as well as help the company vet them for their specific opportunity. So I kind of am like a realtor or a matchmaker for businesses, I think.
That's a good way to put it. And of course, not all realtors doing exactly the same thing do it in the same way. So you realized early on that you wanted to do it a different way. So what's unique? What makes you special in the way that you conduct searches?
I mean,
What's the niche there?
yeah, I think it sounds very cheesy, but I've often been called the recruiter with heart, and I think that's really true. I sincerely care about the well-being of the companies and the candidates that I work with, and I can't say that for all recruiters, although I can say it for Joe. Joe and I are definitely on the same page about being in service to others and our respective businesses. And then I just think, with 23 years of experience comes a lot of processes and clear ideas about how to properly interview. I really try to help companies figure out what is it we're trying to achieve by hiring a person and then reverse engineering the search to match that. So, what kind of a personality fit do we need? What kind of a skill set do we need? So I really try to help them get clear on what they're looking for and then come up with the right interview process and questions to uncover that. I also try to really help business owners see that any hire is half the skill set and half the everything else, all the human stuff. All that human stuff, personality fit, you know, um, things like can they work in the office or do they have to work from home? All of these little things and like people issues, these are the things that people quit or get fired about. And it's not so much they weren't the right skill set, it's usually something personality or personal, human related. So I really try to help companies get clear on what do we need in all of these areas and is this the right person?
So you said two things that really struck me. One is having a heart and the human side, the intangible side of things. I mean, you can't just hire somebody based on a resume, can you? You can't hire somebody that just wrote a whole lot of papers and expect that they will be good teaching in the classroom, kind of thing. And different personalities have different fits for the kinds of companies that they might be well suited for or not so well suited for. So I know that's what you do in terms of trying to really make a good fit, not just what I've seen so many executive recruiters other than yourself do, and that's like a real estate loan processor. They build a file and pass it on with, hey, hire this person that meets all your criteria, except the ones that they didn't think they really needed. And the second is reverse engineering, to actually take apart what is being asked for and say, is that really going to work? Is that really what the company needs? Or then talking to the executives, is this really what the executive needs? So if I've got it right, then I think you provide something pretty special.
Yeah, you've got it absolutely right. And like as far as that reverse engineering thing goes, just an example, say there was a small beverage manufacturer, specialty beverage like kombucha, and they were trying to get off the ground. I can't tell you how many companies like that come to me and say, we need to get someone from Coca-Cola. We need to get someone from a huge beverage manufacturer. And it's like, okay, why? Just for the kind of cachet of having someone from a huge company like that? Like, what is it you're trying to do? Well, we're trying to set up a manufacturing plant, get our brand out there, get our distribution lines set up. Okay, well, let's find someone then that's done that before, and it's definitely not someone at Coca-Cola. So I think, that reverse engineer process is really helpful in getting clear on who's the right person from a skill set standpoint.
So sometimes do you have to bottle it up when you really want to say something, or
Bottle it up. I like
I had
that.
to say that, or do you really tell them?
No, I mean, I have had clients and candidates say, "Gosh, you're tough. This is not necessarily an easy process." I absolutely push back. I would rather not make a placement than make the wrong placement. It's not good for the company, the candidate, or me. And so, I've actually been called too blunt. I think I am a caring, empathetic person, and I definitely can be gentle as the situation requires, but I am not afraid to push back. It's business and we need to hire the right person. So, yeah, I absolutely will firmly push back.
Okay. So that kind of leads us to Joe. And of course, Joe knows all about engineering and reverse engineering because he is an engineer. And engineers understand blunt, don't they? So start first with telling us about your background and how you got into recruiting of engineers and tech people who can be interesting to work with.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I don't think you go to college and you're thinking I'm going to be a recruiter. I mean, I really didn't even know what being a recruiter was like or what kind of profession there was in that field. So I fell into it really. And the first job that I had was in IT recruiting, and it was more temp recruiting, contractors. And like Amanda said, very volume focused and transactional is the way I would see it. But what I learned there is that when we would do some perm hires and it was more kind of pinpointed strategic searches for companies, I really enjoyed that part of it because kind of what Amanda said, there is that connection. You really are changing somebody's life in a permanent way. And it's not forever, but it's a thoughtful decision that both the company and the candidate have to make, and you're helping bridge that decision. So I found that to be very meaningful and fulfilling, just kind of falling into that piece of it. But in 2009, so I started my first business in '09, and I was doing IT recruiting again. But what I really found is that there was a lack of focus on manufacturing from a recruitment perspective. There are so many IT companies that do IT recruiting and things like that. It's very, very competitive, and it's very saturated, if I'm honest. And ironically, I got into some manufacturing companies, and I found it to be even a better opportunity. And there's kind of a reason behind that. But my dad, he grew up, or he basically was a general manager at a manufacturing facility. So I grew up my whole life around manufacturing. So I find it to be valuable and fun and meaningful. And I found it to be that there's not a lot of recruiters that are focusing on that. So we got into that in 2010, and we've been in it for the last 15 years, finding not just engineers, but also operational folks and sales folks. But there's always some sort of a technical spin to all of our placements. And definitely over the last, I don't know, 10 years, you're seeing a lot of industrial automation, which is really starting to sweep so many different levels of manufacturing and distribution. So we're seeing that industry change a lot, which has been really fun to be a part of and to really see the needle move from a technology focus there. Very manual to now more automated.
Including reading resumes with AI, which sounds
Yeah.
really the opposite of heart that
Yeah.
I was talking about. So many of the big companies, because they get so many resumes. I'd hate to be a job seeker today, especially at my age,
Yeah.
and have to deal with that kind of a process. So
Yeah.
engineers are known for being pretty linear in a lot of ways. Things are black and white, ones and zeros, ons and offs. They are not as particularly happy with gray so much, but I know you get the heart component into what you do with the engineers and the tech people as well. How is that challenge met,
Yeah.
engineer to engineer?
So engineers are great. I mean, let's be honest, they're innovating different products. They look at things differently and they're very black and white on certain things. So I tend to find them easy to deal with because they know what they want and they're clear about it. Now we'll play salespeople as well, and that needle can move with salespeople. And with engineers, they're very upfront typically. I mean, some are introverted as you may kind of stereotype on some of them, but if you're able to draw that out and create some sort of an open, vulnerable environment where they can share kind of what they're looking for, they they tend to be very fun and quite easy to deal with because they're transparent. And I think that helps the process. The more transparency that you have, the more likely you're going to get a deal done, especially if you know kind of the expectations from the candidate side, but also from the client side. Like, can we make this happen in the beginning as opposed to finding different types of hurdles along the way, which can be the case in some of these other roles. So um, engineers, I always look at as uniquely different, but definitely are solving problems in different ways, which I enjoy.
I always like von Karman's description of the difference between scientists and engineers. The science is all about discovering that which is, and engineering is creating things that never were. So that kind of approach to looking at things in a new and different way is a skill set that a lot of people don't have, or at least can't apply it to something that is tangible like a product or a line of code, so a bunch of numbers that turn into instructions that can make things happen or
Yeah.
build things. So it does take a special kind of person. And I think it takes a special kind of person to match up talents with opportunities. So how do you two collaborate together? As I know you do on a regular basis. How does that work? Amanda, I'll go back to you.
Yeah, so Joe and I do have a lot of overlap. We each work on some similar positions, but there's some stuff that is just outside of my comfort zone, and I think there's some stuff that's outside of Joe's comfort zone. So, as we have both kind of driven home, we really care about the companies that we work with, and we would much rather have them taken care of by a trusted advisor, in my case, like Joe, or in his case, like me. And so, if a client says, hey, I need this particular position, and I say, if a client asks me for a CTO or, an IT director or something like that, that's totally outside of my comfort zone. And I would much rather have them taken care of by Joe. So I'll send them Joe's way. I would much rather do that than have them Google, IT recruiter, because as Joe said, the market's really saturated. So that's one way. And then the other is that, Joe and I each own our own firms, and recruiting is hard and it's cyclical, sort of. It's psychotically cyclical. It's
Yeah.
up down. It hasn't really followed any patterns in the last like 4 to 5 years that traditionally it has. 23 years in the business, I can tell you that up until about 5 years ago, it was very clear when things would be busy and when they'd be slow, and that's not the case anymore. We always have a different challenge to deal with, whether it's a company or lack of candidates or just a variety of different things. And so Joe and I are on the phone or on video meetings with each other, I would say at least once a month to, share ideas and collaborate and support each other in running our firms.
Yeah. I was going to mention too, where Amanda was talking earlier about how she challenges her customers. I think it's really important that you need to know what you're talking about in order to challenge them, because there's many clients that tell you, oh, I want this pie in the sky type situation. And as a recruiter that's been in the field for a while, they're not getting that. And I can explain that to them in a multitude of reasons, and probably why it's not best for them, but only if it's in the field that I've been focusing on for 15 years. If I'm taking on like an accounting role or an HR role, I don't really have a depth or a frame of reference on what might work and might not work. So they're better suited, I think, in both ways, that they're going to get better advice somewhere else, and ultimately they're going to get a better product. Or maybe they learn that, hey, we need to change up the profile, the model that we're looking at, which is also beneficial.
Okay. So are engineers more comfortable, do you think, talking to an engineer slash recruiter, because you're kind of in even if it's not the same particular area of engineering, but you're at least sharing that engineering base? Does that make it easier for them to accept your advice? I mean, I always thought you were natural for teaching.
Yeah.
Just your style and approach and your knowledge, people, especially having taught engineering students myself, they will listen to someone like you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you just get off the ground faster. What they're doing already. They don't have to start at ground floor. You can already share some examples of things that you've done, people that you've placed, things that haven't worked, things that have worked. Like, there's a lot of relatability in that, and I think it instantly builds a bond. I had somebody come over the other day, and he's a full stack developer over at Netflix, and I started talking to him, and he's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, well, I recruit IT people. He's like, oh, I could tell by the questions that you're asking, because you're getting kind of in the nitty gritty of what I'm actually doing, which I'm sure they're not getting those types of questions often. So I think you speed up the process, you increase the accuracy when you're aligned with the right market, and you're kind of specialized there. So I think that helps.
Okay. So as these conversations go in the episodes, something will always come up that I never would have thought of until you mentioned something. And I'm thinking of the Harvey Mudd students. they're sort of unique. They could get into Caltech, they can get into MIT, but they go to Harvey Mudd because they also want a lot of grounding in the liberal arts. So it's a really different kind of student of engineering than the Caltechs and the MITs of the world. And I've always thought that that's a really good mix of things, is to have that a good grounding in the general education, liberal arts, as especially aiding in the creativity of engineers. You have any thoughts about that, Joe?
Yeah. I mean, I think more and more, the more well-rounded you are, I think you just see in general, companies try to find ways to become leaner and leaner and find people to wear more and more different hats. And I think the more well-rounded you are as an engineer, whether you can communicate well, you're technical, but you have a good understanding of other perspectives, it's well received, and people are more interested in those folks. Now, we were talking about Coca-Cola earlier. When you get into large companies like that, they're more compartmentalized with the skills in terms of what they're doing day in and day out. So maybe they may not be as interested, but more focused in that specific skill set. But I always say this: if you're technical and you can communicate, you're in a good spot, because there's not as many people that are that well rounded. A lot of them are technical and they're kind of introverted and they're working on those other pieces. But if you can do both, you really open yourself up to a lot of opportunities. And I think I always tell people to be able to do that.
Okay. So, Amanda, I'm going to turn the same question to you, but turn it around a little bit. To be a top executive today and land a position, do you have to have technical skills? I mean, do you have to have the ability to use a computer, for example, more than Hunt and Peck? Because we don't have as many secretaries and paralegals and support staff as we once used to have for executives, or that change develop?
Yeah, it's funny. I've taken on a couple of new searches in the past week that you would think the technical skills would be more important, but the people at these companies, they're almost too technical, too analytical. They're not able to relate to other people and establish relationships with other employees, with vendors, with clients, etc. So, and one of the companies I'm talking about is in manufacturing and the other's in construction. So they absolutely still need the kind of technical experience that goes along with those industries, these very niche little companies. But they have to have soft skills too and be personable. In fact, right before we jumped on this podcast, I got an email from another recruiter who's a good friend and partner. And she's been working on a controller search for a company. And she keeps finding controllers, plenty of controllers, but they don't have a personality. And this company is all about people believing in their cause and being really, driven about the cause and connecting in a human way. And so anyway, she's really struggling to find this controller with a gregarious personality and asking for my help. So absolutely. And, a lot of clients these days, whenever I have a new search, I kind of create this search outline of the most important key, skills as well as personal traits. And it's constantly this hands-on, like they have to be strategic and they have to be hands-on. So answering your question about like less assistance and so on. Yeah. I think also I work with small to mid-sized companies where they probably wouldn't have a bunch of assistants like they would at a Coca-Cola, for example. So I mean, people definitely need to have a skill set and be able, if they're a leader, and be strategic and be able to give direction and mentorship and management, but they also need to be able to do the work themselves.
Yeah, at the very least, you have to have some knowledge about how people do some things, or you don't know how well they're doing it. I mean, these software tools for sales management and supply chain management and so on are very, very complicated. And how would you know how to hire someone if you don't have some sense of what those things can do and how to accomplish it? Plus, you gave me a really good idea for when I talk to the CPAs and accountants and providers. I'm going to ask them about controllers. What makes a good controller besides being a cranky pants? Okay. It is a tough job because everyone thinks you're just the constant person looking for bad news and trouble. So I can see why that might affect the personality a little bit. So in the time that we have remaining, I want to talk a little bit about what you see in California. I mean, California is probably the toughest state to do business in from a statutory, regulatory, and tax standpoint. And you're now both working remotely, but you do a lot of business in California. So what do you see, and how does that impact how you approach searches? Amanda, what do you see?
So, yeah, I don't live in the state anymore, but I would say 90% of my business is still in California, and a significant amount of that is in the Inland Empire. And it's really, I feel like the Inland Empire is unique. It's almost different than the rest of California. You know, I have over the years asked a lot of business owners in the Inland Empire, particularly in manufacturing, why do you keep doing manufacturing in California? Why would you continue to do it here when it's difficult, expensive, et cetera? And a lot of them had the same answer, which was we love supporting our community and we want to be a good employer in the state of California. So I think there's a lot of, there's history and personal ties, and people want to continue to support the economy. There's also a lot of really smart people / employees in California. And so from that standpoint, it's a good place to recruit. There's also just a lot of people. I've worked on searches in more remote places like, I don't know, there one comes to mind in Tennessee, and it was in this tiny little town away from any sort of large suburban area. And so recruiting just population wise, there's more people in California to recruit from. I do have some California clients that have opened up the opportunity to work remotely from other states, but they treat their employees that are remote as if they were California employees. So they follow whatever laws
They have to.
state, but preemptively they pay them as if they were a California employee. The salary is the same for anyone, whether they're in California or Tennessee, as another example. So I'm not seeing as much like new business open in California. Not to say that there's not. I just personally have not seen it. It does seem like there's California companies that are opening new locations in other states. I've seen a lot in Idaho and a bit in Oregon, and Tennessee seems to be quite the hot spot, which Joe would know more about than me. So it does seem like there are California companies that aren't necessarily leaving, but maybe they want to open a new factory or just a new hub for operations, and they're opening in another state. So I still see the economy in California as extremely robust, and I'm grateful to be a part of it.
I think it's robust, and it is all by itself one of the largest economies in the world that we can be proud of. But it's also difficult to get used to if you're from out of state. The differences in the approach. So what do you tell an executive who might be from outside of California, who's coming into California? So on the one hand, he's going to be an employee of the company, and he's going to get all kinds of protections that he never dreamed of because they don't exist in other states. And at the same time, he's now the president of the company. He's representing the employer, and he's got to deal with the defenses that are increasingly rare to all these things that favor the employees. Do you talk to the executive at all about what they're in for? Do they have a clue?
I have two answers. One is if we can work without relocating to someone to California, then we should, because the cost of living in Los Angeles or the Bay Area or San Diego, my goodness, is so much more expensive than anywhere else in the country. And so, the sticker shock of buying a home for someone, even if they're doing financially really well, like a president, it's still significant. So I really try to talk my clients out of doing that if possible. And I will tell you, my other answer is I have interviewed a few candidates recently that are president CEO types, just proactively meeting with them to discover what kind of opportunity they're looking for. All of them have said, I'll move anywhere except California. So, and they also have said, I would love to retire in California, but I just, as a CEO or president, it would be very difficult to run a business there. So
everybody out there running a business, write your assemblyman, your senator. You heard it here. Joe, what about you in terms of how you approach engineers about working in California? What do you tell them?
Boy, so much of that rings true. Whenever I have a client in California that wants to relocate somebody to California, it's such a tough task. And I always say you might be able to get somebody earlier in their career or maybe later in their career, because usually in the middle of their career, they have a house and kids potentially, and it's too expensive. And it's such, like Amanda said, it's such a different reality. Like when you have a nice home somewhere else, then you come here and you're in like a town home for the same price. Like it's shocking. But I would say that flexibility and location is everything. Like when we recruit anybody anywhere, like a lot of times when we're recruiting for manufacturing companies in the Inland Empire, there are engineers and leaders that are driving right past their facility and they're going to LA or Orange County. They don't know that they exist. And I think that's where you win in California, because the traffic's tough and it's a lot of time on the road and it's a lot of money wasted. So if you can find somebody closer to home or closer to their work, that's it sounds so basic, but that's a huge win. Or, we talked to a company recently that had 10 employees, but they had incredible benefits. They were very flexible. You could work multiple different kinds of hours in terms of work weeks. Like that flexibility and the ability to choose some of these things, it goes a long way. And I think candidates love to hear that stuff. And the companies, we were talking about this before, that they're not budging or they're not flexible on some of these things, it's difficult. So it just, those are the things we always try to focus on, is how close can we get somebody, because it's going to make a difference, because they're going to have a hard time leaving too.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you see a renaissance of manufacturing possible in California?
I'm hopeful about what's going on right now. I feel like manufacturing, there's a lot of manufacturing obviously in California, and I think automating will help some of that stuff. It has to, otherwise, yeah, it's going to be increasingly more difficult. But I do think there's so much to offer there, and I feel like we've gone through these ups and downs with California, but it still remains a hotbed for talent, and it still remains a very sought after place. But yeah, the cost has gotten kind of crazy lately, and I think that's been a challenge for most things.
Okay. Well, this has been really interesting, and I hope our audience has picked up on some clues, especially in terms of what you may want to do and how you may want to do it when you need some new talent in your organization and you don't know where to find it. Now you have a really good set of clues about what to do next. So, Amanda and Joe, thank you very much for being guests on Professional of the Inland Empire today. And that's going to bring it to an end. So long for now.
Thanks for watching or listening to, depending on the case, the Professionals of the Inland Empire show with your host, John W. Tulac. If you have a suggestion for a guest, email him at jwtulac, that's JWTULAC, @gmail.com. jwtulac @gmail.com.